Tonight, President Biden's Middle East tour, from a pledge of support for a Palestinian state,
2 states for 2 people,
to a controversial meeting with the Saudi prince, the latest from the president's trip. Plus, abortion in America, a look at a shift in support among Catholics in the wake of the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. And
very strong progressive districts flipping red, not even going purple, going from hard blue to red. And there was one common denominator:
the power the Hispanic vote could hold in the midterm elections. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. President Biden takes a high-stakes trip to Saudi Arabia. Good evening and welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Tara Mergener. Human rights atrocities and the murder of a Washington Post journalist. They once led President Biden to call Saudi Arabia a pariah. Now he says he's looking to promote U.S. interests in the region. The president arriving in the country just a few hours ago, greeting Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman with a fist bump. The two scheduled for meetings all day today. Before leaving Israel, the president voiced his support for a Palestinian state. National security correspondent Caitlin Burke has been following Mr. Biden's trip. Caitlin, the president sent a clear message from Israel before leaving for Saudi Arabia.
That's right, Tara. Biden wrapped up his trip to Israel by visiting a hospital in East Jerusalem. It's the first time a U.S. president has ever traveled to that area, and it sends a strong signal that the city could be the future capital of a Palestinian state.
The Palestinian people deserve a state of their own that's independent, sovereign, viable, and contiguous.
Along with reiterating support for a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the president pledged more aid money to the Palestinian Authority, seeking to repair relations after the Trump administration cut ties.
Today, I'm announcing the United States is going to provide an additional $200 million to the UNRWA so it can continue its vital work of helping the most vulnerable Palestinians, especially Palestinian children.
An additional $100 million will go to the East Jerusalem Hospital Network. What has been a larger focus on this trip is Biden's meeting with Saudi leaders, including Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who Biden previously promised to make pay after U.S. intelligence concluded the prince was responsible for the death of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi.
My position on Khashoggi has been so clear. If anyone doesn't understand it, in Saudi Arabia or anywhere else, then they haven't been around for a while.
With high gas prices here at home, the president is likely looking to increase oil flow from the region back to the U.S. But he says the visit is also imperative when it comes to promoting stability in the Middle East.
The reason I'm going to Saudi Arabia, though, is much broader, is to promote U.S. interest. Promote U.S. interest in a way that I think we have an opportunity to reassert what I think we've made a mistake of walking away from, our influence in the Middle East.
With the United States of America distances ourselves from other people and other countries that should be stronger friends and stronger allies, they go elsewhere. And when they go elsewhere, there aren't other good, friendly countries that are waiting with open arms. Saudi has an enormous amount of resources. They are an attractive prize on the world stage. So whether it's China or Russia or others, that's where they're going to run to. And therefore, it behooves us to hug them closely and to enhance the relationship with them, even if we've got challenges in that relationship. To distance them is only going to propel them towards our enemies and our foes.
Biden's flight from Israel into Saudi Arabia was actually historic in itself. It's the first time a U.S. president has been able to take that direct flight. Saudi Arabia now granting flyover rights to Israel. Tara?
Caitlin, thank you. To the issue of abortion, the Pope has weighed in on President Biden's position on abortion, calling it incoherent. In an interview with Univision and Televisa, the Pope was asked about whether or not communion should be offered to politicians who support abortion. The Pope pointed out that scientific evidence shows that DNA is already present within a month of conception. ACI Prensa reports that as for the president's defense of abortion, the Pope said Biden should, quote, talk to his pastor about that inconsistency. Well, new data shows Catholics in the United States are more supportive of legalizing abortion than they were just over a decade ago. According to a survey from the Public Religion Research Institute, 64% of white Catholics support legal abortion in most or all cases. That is up from 53% back in 2010. Among black Catholics, that number is 75%. Up 56%. The biggest jump in abortion support was seen in Hispanic Catholics. The new figures show 75% think the procedure should be legal in most cases. Back in 2010, only 51% of Hispanic Catholics felt that way. Well, for more on this, we turn now to Father Frank Pavone. He is the National Director of Priests for Life and President of the National Pro-Life Religious Council. Father Pavone, thank you so much for joining us today. Looking at these numbers, what do you think is behind the growing support for abortion among Catholics in America?
Well, you know, when you look at these surveys, you have to distinguish between Catholics who are actually connected to their Catholic faith and practicing it and learning what the church says and why. And those who are not. Most of these polls don't make that distinction. We at Priests for Life, of course, are working with practicing Catholics every day all across the country. I've been interacting with them, saying masses at churches across America and speaking specifically on abortion for the last 3 decades. I actually find an increasing uneasiness with how unrestricted American abortion policy has been. And we have a lot of other surveys that show that, not only among Catholics, but across the spectrum of Americans. You know, people have never embraced the idea, which the Democrat Party is embracing, that abortion should be unrestricted right up until birth, that there shouldn't be reasonable limitations, for example, on late-term abortion or parental involvement laws for minors getting abortion. I'm finding, and I say, as I say, many of these polls are finding, an increased desire among Americans for more restrictions. So we would have to look specifically, you know, you have to look at the methodology of these polls, the exact nature of the questions, and again, the sampling that they are using. But there's a growing pro-life support among, especially, as I say, Catholics who are practicing their faith.
Right, always have to look at the methodology there, of course. And the Pope, on another issue, recently spoke out on President Biden's abortion stance, saying the president should speak to his pastor about the issue. Is there a disconnect between the church's teaching on the sanctity of life and how parishioners view abortion?
Very often there is, and of course it depends on who else they're listening to. A lot of it depends on political loyalties, and I think this obviously is connected with that polling data. Where are the political loyalties? It's strange. It doesn't have to be this way, but we see that the Democrat Party is attracting people who are less active in their faith and also more supportive of this abortion mentality, whereas the Republican Party has become more and more the party of faith and of pro-life. Those divisions have intensified over this last decade. But what we see is a very, very strong inconsistency between a lot of these politicians who identify as Catholics, like President Biden, like Nancy Pelosi, and what the teaching of the church is. But I would emphasize the teaching of the church on abortion is not primarily a religious teaching. The church is starting on the basis of science. Now, I'm not sure why the Pope said in that quote that we've been hearing, why he made reference to a month, because the DNA, the specific DNA, the specific genetic characteristics of a human individual don't come into effect a month after conception. They come into effect at the very instant of conception. So that's a scientific reality. But be that as it may, I mean, that's the science, and that's where the church starts. And that's what I want our listeners to understand, is that it's the science that is our starting point. Yeah.
Right. Father, we are out of time. Thank you so much for your thoughts, and certainly a lot more to come on this.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Well, the 2024 race for the White House, will we see a second Biden-Trump showdown? Next on Faith Nation. Welcome back. We have not even made it to the 2022 midterm elections, but many are already looking ahead to the 2024 race, of course, for the White House. And right now, support for a re-election run by President Biden is at its lowest to date. According to a new Yahoo News YouGov poll, only 18% of Americans say the president should run for re-election come 2024. That is, nearly two-thirds say he should just bow out of the race. So who should replace him as the Democratic nominee? According to the poll, only 19% of Democrats think it should be Vice President Kamala Harris. 20% say it should be somebody else, and 30% just are not sure at all. Meanwhile, former President Trump is set to make his return to Washington, D.C. It's the first time he has been to the nation's capital since the day of Joe Biden's inauguration. His July 26th visit will come as the headlines a two-day summit held by the American First Policy Institute. According to the head of the group, the America First Agenda Summit will focus on restoring American greatness and will showcase policies to lowering gas prices and inflation, secure the border, and, quote, return law and order in our cities. Well, President Trump's speech and D.C. return will take place just a few days after the final House Select Committee hearing on the role of former President Trump that he played in inciting the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. So here with us now is Julia Manchester, political reporter for The Hill. Julia, let's start there. The hearings this summer have had some bombshell testimony highlighting President Trump's role in the attack. What do you make of his D.C. return just days after the final primetime hearing?
You know, look, I'm not sure if he did that purposefully, but it is interesting timing. We know that instead of talking about the normal Republican talking points, such as inflation, crime, and the situation at the southern border, President Trump has actually talked about the January 6th House Committee and spent most of his time talking about that, as well as the 2020 presidential election. So I'm sure we'll be, hearing more about that during his address.
No doubt about it. Politico is also reporting the former president has been touting his 2024 plans to secret donor dinners. So when could we see an official announcement on if he is going to run?
Well, President Trump told New York Magazine yesterday that he's made a decision, but the decision is whether he announces or whether he, announces that decision before the midterms or after the midterms. Now, Republican sources I've been talking to say that he will likely announce after the midterms. If he were to announce before the midterms, he could, blow Republicans' chances in terms of, turning off maybe some voters who were unhappy about Trump, but happy about maybe or in favor of a down ballot Republican for Senate or House or governor, for example. So he's going to have to be very careful with that. But, in terms of, whether he will face a primary challenge or not, I think it's interesting. There was a New York Times Siena College poll that was released today or earlier this week, and it found that 49% of Republican primary voters were in favor of Trump running for re-election and would support him. However, 47% said they would choose a different candidate. So it's not a sure bet that he would be the nominee.
Certainly a lot of anticipation one way or the other on that. Also, Julie, as we reported, only 18% want President Biden to run for re-election. Some stunning numbers. What could he do, if anything, to get that number up? And do you think he's going to run?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, look, you're facing a scenario with Biden with such low approval ratings and such low approval ratings for Trump that, it seems like a lot of people don't want to end up in a Trump-Biden scenario again. Whether he will run, I mean, the White House is saying he will run. We'll have to see. But in order to get those numbers up, look, I think a lot of it has to do with the economy. I think inflation is really hurting President Biden at the polls. Americans feel this every day at the gas pump, at the grocery store, online shopping. Really, every aspect of American life is affected by inflation, and I think that's what's happening in the polls. They're blaming the person at the top, and that's President Biden.
All right, Julie Manchester, thank you so much for joining us. Have a great weekend.
You too.
All right, well, a mass exodus of Hispanics from the Democratic Party. What it could mean for the midterms when Faith Nation returns. No doubt about it, inflation is a major issue as voters look ahead to the November midterm elections. A recent poll from the Associated Press and the Nork Center for Public Affairs finds 40% name inflation as a top priority the government needs to tackle. For comparison, in 2020, less than 1% thought the same. Other economic issues weighing on Americans this election year, 44%, their personal finances, and 10% mentioned jobs or unemployment. As Democrats try to fight off a red wave come November, one voting bloc they'll have to win over is Latinos. But that may not be so easy. Signs indicate that voter population is moving to the right. Capitol Hill correspondent Mel Galka brings us that story from Nevada.
Are Latino voters shying away from Democrats? The demographic has been highly sought after and will continue to be by both parties as we head into November. And the work is already being done on the ground here in Nevada.
Do you think I could leave this at your door? I work with Make the Road Nevada.
Door after door in the sizzling heat of the Las Vegas summer.
You guys going to vote early this year or in election day? Probably election day.
Mauricio Garcia knocks on doors for Make the Road Nevada, attempting to persuade prospective voters. The conversations vary from immigration to inflation to health care.
And our Únete al Movimiento cards, right?
Civic Engagement Director Jessica Padron is well aware of the inroads made by the GOP and worries about an exodus of Latino voters to the right. She's concerned Democrats may have taken this key voting bloc for granted and need to wake up.
I do feel that while some of the policies may not be very popular from the Republican Party, they are investing way more and doing outreach offices in these communities. They're doing events in these communities. The Democratic playbook has not changed. They're still doing the same, what I call mariachi politics, which is a taco truck, some mariachis in the same little couple corners. And that doesn't reach when you have, for example, a Nicaraguan community, Cuban community, other groups. I think it's really important that we engage all these voters and not just say, well, they're automatically going to vote Republican or they're automatically going to vote Democrat. It's about who talks to you, who makes you feel good, who educates you, and who's there for you. Not just during the election period, but after.
Nevada could become ground zero where the true impact of a movement is revealed, possibly signaling which party will go on to control Congress after the midterm elections. In 2020, Latinos made up more than 400,000 eligible voters in the Silver State, a number that's projected to make up about 1 out of 5 votes cast here. Both parties would like the numbers on their side. Political insider and Nevada Independent editor Elizabeth Thompson says it would be unwise for Democrats to focus on a singular issue like immigration, with issues like inflation and rising costs squeezing all Nevada voters.
But the numbers don't lie. One of the reasons that Donald Trump won in Nevada last time around was because he got a larger share of the Hispanic and Latino vote than most people expected him to. I think that was a little bit of a wake-up call for the Democrats.
And the trends are hard to ignore. Joe Biden lost ground with Hispanic voters in 2020, while Donald Trump made 10-point gains nationwide. Republicans are trying to keep that momentum going in 2022. The Libre Initiative is focusing its ground game on the economy. Libre's Eddie Diaz says anxiety over the cost of living can be tied directly to the party that's in power now.
Talking about how this year we're going to pay over $5,000 more in taxes. We're going to pay like $1,200 more just in gas, close to $500 more in groceries. And they're taking notice of that. And they know who's in power, which administration has control currently, and they're getting turned off.
Democrats took another hit in June when Texas Republican Mayra Flores won a special election in a heavily Latino House district that had traditionally voted blue.
We cannot accept the increase of gas, of food, of medication. We cannot accept that.
Flores is getting national attention now, and Pastor Samuel Rodriguez believes her win is just the beginning.
Florida, Texas, Nevada, even California, we saw the flipping of certain districts, very strong progressive districts, flipping red, not even going purple, going from hard blue to red. And there was one common denominator. These districts were primarily over 60% Hispanic populated.
Rodriguez is an influential voice as leader of the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference, which represents more than 40,000 churches nationwide. While he welcomes this trend and believes it's rooted in faith values, he says it's premature to anoint the GOP as the party of Latinos.
As more and more whites shift towards the left, more and more Latinos are shifting towards the right. So be careful in wanting to deport the future of the conservative movement. So, that sort of language, tone, rhetoric, it's important for Republicans to be cognizant and aware of that.
Back on the ground in Nevada, Marco Hernandez considers himself part of the shift. A candidate for one of the seats on the Clark County Commission, he ran as a Democrat last election cycle and came up just short. He switched to an independent since then.
I'm actually one of them. I went from being a Democrat to a nonpartisan for the same reason that everybody feels like, both party lines are blaming each other for work that needs to be done and nobody wants to do anything about it. People are fed up and they want to see change. They don't want to see the same old politics.
Now, one of the reasons that both parties are so focused on the demographic, the Latino population has quintupled in the country in the past 50 years. Nevada could be an indication of where at least some of those voters are going. In Las Vegas, Matt Gelka, CBN News.
Still ahead, a young surfer gets a surprise at sea. Details when we come back. All right, finally tonight, a once-in-a-lifetime experience that probably never happened to you. A Florida family was recently out surfing when they quickly realized they were not alone. The family was approached by two manatees. Manatees, right? That's incredible. Although the animals are so big, the close encounter was very playful. One of the manatees swimming beneath the boys' surfboard before eventually grabbing the board with its flipper. My goodness, the family said the interaction made for a very special birthday gift for their twin sons. Or I guess we're going to turn 11 the next day. Wow, I'd love to do that myself as soon as I realized that wasn't a shark. Have a great weekend, everybody. That's going to do it for Faith Nation. Be safe out there. We'll see you Monday.